If you like these videos and you want to see them a day before they go up on YouTube, head over to LBRY. It's an awesome decentralized alternative to YouTube, and I absolutely love it. Hey everybody, it's your friend and your guy and your favorite biased Linux shill, Gardiner. That's a twist-tonger. Today we're going to be talking about the Supreme Court, Google, and Oracle, because this is something that has been weighing on my mind for a little while, and I wanted to talk about it. So let's go over kind of the history of this lawsuit and what the ramifications might be for not just open source, but for computing in general. So I'm sure you're familiar with the fact that Apple uses a single monolithic architecture for the iPhone, and Google uses a more distributed kind of whatever approach for manufacturers and Android phones. And I'm sure you're also familiar with the fact that code written for one CPU, or code compiled for one CPU, I should say, probably won't work on a different CPU from a different manufacturer. So Google needed to solve that problem because they wanted to have multiple manufacturers having different CPUs, and they looked at their options and they found Java. Java was owned by Oracle, who is the villain of open source. So Google said, you know what, we're going to make our own thing and we're going to implement 37 of Java's APIs, or application programming interfaces. And that wasn't illegal, and nobody thought anything of it until Oracle decided in 2014 that they were going to sue Google for $8 billion because of copyright infringement. I'm not going to make any bones about this here. I am not objective. I don't try to be objective, and I feel like pretending to be objective is an insult to you, the viewer. So instead of pretending to be a robot news reporter, I'm going to present the facts of the case, my opinion on them, and what I think is at stake here, because you're too intelligent to make believe with me that I'm an objective third party here. Let's not pretend. So I would agree that Oracle does own the copyright for Java. They own the actual code, they own the binaries that are built from that code, they own the logo and the word mark for Java. That's about it. They don't own the idea of a virtual machine. They don't own the copyright over the APIs that developers must use in order to interact with the Java virtual machine. And that's one of the main arguments that Google is making. The APIs that Google implemented on Android are what's known as a mode of operation. Just like Ford or Toyota don't own the concept of a steering wheel, an accelerator, or brake pedals in a car, but they can own the name and design of the respective models of those vehicles. In fact, nobody in their right mind would want Ford or Toyota or any other car manufacturer to own the copyright of how to pilot the vehicle. Nobody would want that. Doing so would mean that manufacturers would have to literally reinvent the wheel when it comes to the way you drive your car. That would result in drivers that need to be trained in different ways of driving based on the manufacturer of the car. And even worse, that could lead to people being locked into only being able to drive a Toyota or a Tesla or anything like that. And if you ever tried to drive a car you weren't good at driving, or you hadn't been trained in driving, you'd be far more likely to cause car accidents. So when it comes to the law, copyright, and how it works with software, there's actually some precedent around this. So back in 1995, spreadsheet software Quattro implemented a feature that wholesale emulated the Lotus 123 user interface in the name of keeping things simple for Lotus users who wanted to make the switch to Quattro. The company that made Quattro, Borland International, was sued by Lotus 123 for copying their interface, which they claimed was a violation of their copyright. The First Circuit Court of Appeals actually sided with Borland and Quattro on this issue, saying that the user interface was a method of operation, and therefore their copying was considered fair use. And I have to say that I am definitely in agreement with the First Circuit Court of Appeals here. A user interface is not and should not ever be copyrightable, since it is a method of operation. Similarly, something like Olive Video Editor, which takes much of its user interface inspiration from Adobe Premiere's interface, well, that would be considered a method of operation and fair use under this precedent as well. I mean, that's how it should be. Imagine if Adobe had copyright over the way to apply effects in Adobe Premiere to a video or audio track. Well then, in order for any other video editing software out there to have effects that you can apply to your effects, to your tracks in your timeline, you would have to come up with a different way, a completely different way of actually implementing that in the user interface. And that would basically mean vendor lock-in for your end users. A user interface is just as much a mechanism of vendor lock-in as any proprietary format or hardware or license or codec could be. So I think that a UI paradigm should remain uncopyrightable, and I think that that is paramount. And Google has argued here that a user interface is basically the same thing as an application programming interface. And I think Google's right here. An API is a method of operation for a program to interact with another program. It makes absolutely no sense for APIs to be copyrightable, not from a legal, not from a fair use, and not from a practical sense. And I don't think that the stakes here could be much higher either. If the Supreme Court rules in favor of Oracle, this could be positively disastrous, not just for open source, but for computing and software development in general. Open source implementations of things that are proprietary, like, for example, Amazon's S3 object storage, would suddenly become vulnerable to legal siege, even if the code is implemented in a clean room scenario, because what's at stake here is the way that your program interacts with the other program. So if you have an S3 storage and you use a method to tell the S3 storage, whether it's Amazon's or an open source alternative, hey, it's time to upload this file, well, because it's a proprietary standard and there's no other way to implement it, the open source software has to copy the interface command or the API command to upload a file. There's no other way to implement it, and that's the standard. So that's what's being argued in this case. Much of the video game emulation scene would find themselves in similar situations, not to mention things like Wine and Proton, which are basically translation layers for Microsoft's proprietary Windows APIs. They would be in particular peril here, since Microsoft is also quite litigious. And you think if Oracle is pissed about Google copying their APIs, how do you think they feel about OpenJDK? And projects like ReactOS and Haiku could also be in jeopardy. The precedent set here could have unforeseen ramifications, not just for open source, but for programmers and businesses everywhere. Instead of being able to collaborate and work together, the precedent that might be set if the Supreme Court finds in favor of Oracle could be absolutely disastrous, forcing so many different companies to create their own APIs from Atom that would prevent anyone from working together on basically anything to avoid legal headaches. That is disastrous. That would be a very sad day. And I've seen speculation that like the Linux Foundation and the GNU herd could end up being facing legal action because they have copied over APIs from Unix. I mean, the ramifications here could be terrifying. You've heard of patent trolls. API trolls could be the next worst thing to happen to open source. And I don't know. I don't want to leave this on a sad note. I don't want to leave this on a scary note. So I'll just say this instead. In the United States, we have three branches of government. We have checks and balances. A ruling from the Supreme Court is not permanent, despite what so many people seem to think. If Congress did its job, in fact, a bad ruling from the Supreme Court could be overturned or changed by the passing of new legislation. So if you believe that Google is in the right here, if you believe that APIs should not be copyrightable, you need to vote. Vote for someone who actually understands computers. Vote for someone who actually cares about making like real and meaningful changes for copyright. Voting has already begun in my state and many states across the country. You'll find places that you can actually register to vote down below. Make sure you vote on November 3rd. Vote early if you can. Vote by mail if possible. Voting is your civic duty, and I hope that you use a link below to get registered and get out and vote. I want to say thank you to Sheldon Halcomb and the 103 amazing people over on Patreon who make what I do here possible. If it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be able to do this, so thanks, guys. If you believe in the work that I do, you can help support the show with a monthly contribution over on Patreon. I very much appreciate it. There's a link down below. You can also support the show just by clicking that like button, hitting subscribe. It really makes a huge difference. You can also pick up a t-shirt. There's a link below. But no matter what you do, I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye for now, and have a blessed day.